pop up here just for a moment and try not to be blinded. Because it could have just, there we go. That's the right angle. My name is Brian Quirum. You're here for the New Dawn Training Conference. Sorry, this is a financial data entry class. That should be the next slide that you see up here. Anybody who doesn't think they want to learn how to enter financials, basic, this is how JustWare works. Because that's what we're doing here. Great. My name is Brian Quirum, and I'll use Sean's line. If you like what you see today, just fill out one of those little comment cards in the back and give me a 5. And if you don't like it, give Sean Cadena a 0. So far, that's worked beautifully for us. So we are being filmed today, so the cameraman will kind of move around the room. Make sure you let him know what your best side is. This is my best side. This part. So without any more, let me get an idea of where we're at. Who is implemented with JustWare right now but is not using financials just yet? Okay, so we have a couple of sort of brand new, and who's using financials in a current implementation? Okay, and the rest of you are somewhere in between, and you guys are from Olathe, right? So I know you've been working in financials a bit. Great. Anybody else is in any other kind of status? You're just curious how it works, or?
Yes.
All right. Oh, pre-install. Excellent. Good time. Pre-purchase. Prospect. Revenue. All right, over here. No. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I am going to operate from back in the back of the room, and I apologize for that. But the way we're set up, the cord doesn't reach that far, so I'm going to talk to your backsides, unfortunately.
That's my best side anyway.
So this is real interactive. If you have questions, just raise your hand and let's go from there. I'll try to look around the room, but if you're behind me, just let me know, or have one of the other guys will let me know if we have questions to start with. We have plenty of time to do this, so I'm not too worried about our time. And the way we'll proceed is I have both PowerPoint and we'll actually go into JustWare. So what I'll do is kind of show you using the PowerPoint what it is that we're trying to accomplish and what we're going to do and what it's going to look like. And then we'll go into JustWare and actually do that action so that you can see how it actually works. The one thing we're not going to cover is how you set up financials, with one exception. I do want to show you the obligations to give you, because it's sort of relevant to some of the things that we'll talk about when we start taking payments, but we really are going to function from the assumption that your administrators have already gone through financials, set all the defaults, and created financials in the way that you want them to be processed for your agency. So that's how we'll go through. We're really concerned about what's the user experience, right? What is the user going to see from creating an obligation to closing out your end-of-day processes. So first thing, we have our obligations. And the reason we have obligations is we have a case, and in that case, you need to create an obligation to show that someone owes you money in the context of that case. Obligations are all created in the background as part of financial configuration. And I'll go through those in just a minute, but I wanted to show you what the screen looks like up here. As soon as I find my little mouse, there he is. So again, we're in a case record. We're in the financial snap-in of the case record. And what we have here this is the type of obligation that you're going to create, meaning the thing that they owe you money for. The total amount of that obligation. This column for unallocated amount is simply the amount that remains to be paid on this obligation. So as you take payments, this is going to decrease. The pay by is the person in the background who owes this money to you. Pay to is sort of the opposite side of that. Who is ultimately going to receive this money and account for it using JustWare's tools. We have a pay to account, meaning we're going to track the funds that come in for this obligation into this 03 account. The due date is set by default by JustWare to be the day or the day after you created this obligation. This can be changed in the background in obligations to go to a future date, but I believe the earliest we've ever been able to get it to set is it's due tomorrow. I don't think it actually uses today's date. Collecting agency is who is the agency that's going to ultimately receive this money. The collecting agency can be different than the pay to. For purposes of simplicity, I went ahead and just set the two things to be the same. And the important thing about collecting agency is you, as a user, have to be a member of a collecting agency to see obligations that are owed to the collecting agency or to take payments on those obligations. Obviously, if you can't see the obligation, you're probably not going to want to take a payment on it. So for those of you who have multiple jurisdictions, if you're a multiple court setup, and each of your courts is operating as a separate agency and takes money that's owed to you as your court, or court 1, court 2, court 3, or court 4, if you want to take payments that are owed to another court and then transfer that money ultimately to them, you will have to be members of that collecting agency. So again, if you want to see the different obligations across all of the courts in your jurisdiction, or that your JustWare implementation covers, you have to be a member of each of those collecting agencies. Any questions about that? Because that turns into a fairly significant concept for anybody who's a multi-agency organization. A lot of folks are set up, we actually have several customers that are set up that way, but they're actually only a member of a single collecting agency because they're not quite ready to go to the point where you're taking money in one court that's owed to another court, and that whole transfer of money and accounting of money that goes from there. So, but it's absolutely possible and can be done. It's just a matter of setting it up. All right, let me go into JustWare right quick and show you this how we set up the obligations in the background, because I do think that will be of some assistance to you. So this is the JustWare instance that we'll be using. It's just a sample. I just created a few things in here. It's not fully configured for everyone or for everything that I'm going to do, but it will cover the very basics of data entry. Because the point of this class is not to be the most complicated. The point of this really is to just let you know how JustWare works in a way that allows you to then take that and make it more complex in your own implementation. So for those of you who haven't had the admin class, I just went to the system administration, into the code tables, and code tables are where we're going to set up our financial obligations. So in the background, I just set these very basic obligations. Here's the same things we'll see as we go through and create these obligations. I set default amounts for some of them because they will always be the same. Some will be variable, like a fine. That'll be whatever the judge imposes. Restitution obviously would be variable depending on what the amount was. I've set my default collecting agency. For each of these, fraudulent check I've expired as a code. You won't see that. There's no need, at this point, there's no need to set either of these default from and to accounts and agencies. The default pay to is on my agency. The default to account, this is where I'm setting how I track that money into different places. So ultimately, we will be able to keep track of how much money you've collected that should essentially be associated with a specific account in your system. Here's my default due date, where I can set, if it's due 10 days from today by default, fine, we set in 10. The allocation priority and percentages is one of the very powerful features of JustWare. What it allows you to do is just to auto-allocate a payment. And you can set this up in a way that if money comes in, you can specify which obligations get paid first. You can specify percentages of those obligations by using the allocation percent. Because JustWare is built on the philosophy that if you take a payment in and you just hit save, JustWare is going to allocate that for you. And it's going to allocate that based on the due date by picking the oldest obligation first. Then it's going to look to the priority, and it's going to say, what's my oldest obligation with the highest priority? And it's going to pay those off in the percentage that you've set there. And then it's going to move to obligation, the next oldest with the next highest priority, and it's going to just work its way down. So you don't have to think about any of that. And if that works for you, that's great, because that makes it real simple for the end user. They just hit save. Any questions about that? So that's how we set up the kind of this default behavior of JustWare to auto allocate.
What if it's not a percentage?
Keep talking.
For instance, you have fines of a certain dollar amount and the fees are based on the sliding scale.
Right, so there'd be a business rule that would essentially calculate those things out, and Sean actually has built a very good business rule for the Nevada courts that can take the fine amount and then break that amount down into the percentages based on the requirements of whatever jurisdiction. So for our purposes, we're not even going to have a business rule. We want to walk before we can run, and I see business rules as running. So we are at the walking stage at this point, but that is how you would do that. Of course, you could do that manually. You could say, you could get your calculator out each time, but that'd be crazy. So we're not doing that. All right. And that's really, this is how you set up obligations in the background. These are the basic obligations I've set up. Anybody have any questions about those obligations? All right, so that just gets us to, let's see, let me go over here back to the PowerPoint real quick. So, adding obligations, here's our process. There's some minimum requirements that you must have, and realistically, you will have these things unless you create obligations when you very first open up a case and create a case. You must have a case, of course. You must have a charge, and you must have a charge-involved person in that charge. You can call this statute, count, charge, whatever it is. This is the bad thing the person did, and here's the person that did it. You can have multiple charges, of course. You can have multiple involved persons in a charge if you needed to have that. So you could have 5 charges, 3 of them apply to defendant 1 and 2 of them apply to defendant 2. And by associating a charge and an involved person, that makes them available essentially in the financial stream to assess an obligation to that person. Once we get that, we would just go into our financial snapping, hit the plus button here to add those obligations, and start typing in the types of obligations, the amounts. This is going to fill into the same amount as the total amount, because this is the unallocated, or the amount still due column. Here's who's going to have to pay this. Here's who it is paid to. That's the account we track it into, due date, which is default, and then collecting agency, all of which we've talked about. Any questions about that? As we're looking at this, where do we find the amounts that somebody owes? We can find that in the case summary. So I just ran a case summary report for Mr. Testola's case, and we see his obligations, all the relevant information, and this is dynamic, so as they make payments, it's all going to be reflected here. So if somebody calls you and has their case number, you can call up their case and very quickly tell them how much they still owe. In the name summary, there is, in both the name summary and financial name summary, you'll see a report at the top of the page. Well, from the payment snap-in, you'll see this financial name summary report, and that's what this is, a screenshot from the payments snap-in. But if you were just in a name record and you hit on the left, went over to the financial name summary report, you would just see what's in the top portion of this. And it tells you essentially what they owe. Again, let me back up 1 minute. Hold on, hold your thought. Back to collecting agency. This is not quite the last time I'll flog this horse, but I'm going to flog it one more time. Again, if you are not a member of this collecting agency, you will not see this. But if you are a member of multiple collecting agencies, each of those, you'll just click that drop down and be able to pick what court, essentially, or collecting agency these obligations should pertain to. Make sense? And question?
Oh, I was just curious about the barcode.
That's a barcode. It's a series of black lines that and there's these little infrared reader dudes that you can. Sorry, I'm teasing you. Those are there. JustWare has a barcode reader feature that if you put your barcoding on, you can open the name or case by scanning that barcode. So if you have a hard copy of a piece of paper and those barcodes are on it, that's what it'll allow you to do. That's a setting in JustWare that allows those to be seen. And if you're not using barcoding, you can turn that off for you.
Does the collecting agency, is that a default, or do you have to put that in every time?
So the collecting agency will default in, it's a function of the obligation, or the obligation setup, so that you don't have to do it every time. You could, if you wanted to, but we don't want to do that. That's way too hard. All right, let's go ahead and, any questions about that so far? We doing all right? Okay, I know it's after lunch and those are great sandwiches, so if anybody needs me to talk faster, you just let me know. So for payments, there's basically in Justware, our concept is cases do not owe you money, names owe you money. People owe you money because a case cannot owe you any money. A case is just a place where you store the information about the person that owes you the money. So we always take payments from name record with one exception, which I'll talk about later. But for the most part, your users are going to go to one of the views that you see on the left, advanced payments, or the tab details view, and then each of these will give you access to essentially this payment snap-in. And can everybody see this all right? I don't know that I can zoom it up anymore, but. So we've got our financial name summary at the top that tells us how much the person owes. We also see here under total unpaid obligations, the amount that they owe you. If they owed you a bond obligation, which I hesitate to call that an obligation because it is different, but in fact it is an obligation the person owes you, bonds will appear right here because they're treated separately from financial obligations. We track those a little bit differently. And backwards goes that way. Forwards goes that way. There we go, back. We're back in action. All right, some of the other things you'll see on this payment snap-in are the amount that's available in overpay, and that's exactly what it means. Somebody overpaid you, and so you are holding money in Justware, or you're holding an amount in Justware for this person's benefit and use. You're holding that money in trust for them, essentially, because you received a payment that exceeded the amount of obligations that the person had, or when you took that payment, and we'll talk about this in a moment, you put it into their escrow account. You didn't allocate it to an existing obligation. And that's what available in escrow is. So this is money that you owe them. This is money that they owe you, to be real simple about it. Bonds, next due is based on the due date. So for this fella, we have $230 that's owed as of May 2 of 2014. So clearly he's past due. Well, interestingly, he's not past due. Which should be past due. I took these screenshots actually quite a while ago, so there's no telling what's going on with that. No, total due is $230. Any questions about this top portion? So when we take our payment, we're just going to select from this drop down the payment type. Put in our amount right here. Here's our payer, which does not necessarily have to be the defendant or the obligated party. You can put anybody in there that you want. This screen is a search screen in Justware. It's going to do a name search of your database and look for a payer's name. If you want to put somebody in there as a different person than the payer, you do have to create that person in your database and save it so that their name can appear in here. And that's really the only way that can happen. There are some folks who have said, I really don't like that feature. I want to be able to just type somebody's name in there. And the design of Justware is we don't want you to do that. We want the accountability that comes from having a name record, because our theory is if someone has paid money, that person gets that money back. And we need them in the database to have the rest of the Justware functionality that would allow us to refund that person the money to them. They've just got to be in the database. So the only workaround for this, if you choose not to put the defendant or the payer's name in there, is to put the payer's name in the notes, and then it's not lost in Justware, but it's darn difficult to find that, and it's not searchable really by any existing searches we have. So all that being said, Justware, the theory of Justware is you got to put that payer's name in there. Yes, ma'am?
Could you just show that process of searching for someone not having
Yep.
how to create the name record for them?
You are like one step ahead of me.
I'm sorry.
Almost there. Reference number. This is just a notes field essentially that would allow you to put in like a check number or a credit card authorization number or something like that. Simply a notes field. For case, will allow you to, it will pull down a list of all their active cases that they have obligations on, and you can track the money that you're taking into that case. And if you're using auto allocation, you just select the for case, hit save, and that money will auto allocate to that case. The receive date is, of course, today's date and time. Very important for your financial accounting at the end of the day. Standard notes field, and then here we have the allocate to escrow, which I alluded to, I talked a little bit about. If you select that option, that drops any funds that you accept right into this person's escrow account up here. And the concept of this was, you have not created a case yet, but you've received the money. So if someone that, let's say, has a speeding ticket in your town, the police officer takes them directly to the courthouse, which is just not ready to create a case for you yet, you can take money from someone associated with their name record, give them a receipt that says, we've got your money, we'll give it back to you at some point, or we're going to apply it to your case, but we just have not created your case yet. So you can save, you can, I don't know how many people have use of that or need that functionality, but that is a possibility if you want it. So, any questions about this this snap-in? All right, then let us go to Justware. So, let's talk about taking a payment. Who is paying attention and can tell me what I have to have, or where will I take a payment from? Right on, people are quick. And there just happens to be somebody named Smith in my database, which I know is shocking to you. And I see that they have 2 cases. At this point, I don't actually care about their cases because, remember, a case does not owe you money. A person owes you money. So Justware aggregates all of the payments that are due to you under that person's name record for your collecting agency. Beat the horse one more time. We're just pulling up his name record, and I'm just going to go straight over to the Financials tab. And I'm in the tab Details View. So I talked earlier about what views are available for you to take payments on. And these are the views from which you could take payments. So let's just take a quick look. Payments is my favorite, so I'm going to go ahead and just go straight to there. So our financial name summary is loading up top. We see that this is different. He has $571 that are owing. That's across all of his cases for this collecting agency. Beating the horse one more time.
Why is this your favorite? Because of the report?
I like it because it has the report at the top. I can see why some folks might not like that because they don't like the time it takes for that to resolve. But I can actually work down here while that's resolving up top. So for me, I just like having all of that information in one place. Then again, I've never actually taken payments in the context of a court. So it could be that your user experience is a whole different thing.
It's just good to know what people like and.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's just take a quick look at your other options. We saw the tab Details View. So, not a tremendous difference between these views. And then tab Details is just through the name record. Sometimes it's nice to have the tab Details view while you're doing this because you have quick access to case involvements over here if you need it as a quick reference. But I think it's a pretty useful view. So either way, whichever one you like, it's all good. I think you can easily take payments here and know what you need to allocate it to, and you can see all of that once we actually take our payment. We'll see that. So let's go ahead and take payment. And you can see I've already taken some payments for this fellow of different types. But we just go here and add a new payment. Select my payment type, which I'll start with cash, but we can select from our choices. These all represent real money that comes in. So cash, cashier's check, credit card, money order, and personal check. That represents money, real dollars that you're going to have to account for at the end of the day that out of your till. Non-monetary payment, we'll talk about in a little bit, but that's just basically allows us to reduce a particular obligation because they've engaged in some kind of a fine work-off or cost work-off program. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but we'll pick our amount, and he's being a little stingy with his money this week, but hey, he is consistent in his payments, and it's important. So my choices are here. I can allocate it to his name record by clicking on this, but since he has outstanding obligations, I'm going to choose not to do that. I have my for case. And say if I want to track it into this case, fine. I'll hit statute 1 or statute 2. Again, these are different cases. Our reference number, pretty easy to see. And now here's our payer snap-in that we talked about. If let's see if Jane Smith came in. I know that I'm going to have to create this name record in my database because I just know that Jane Smith doesn't exist. I'm going to select this named grid search option, which for those of you who have JustWare, you know from the left side, is kind of a data entry shortcut. I've just engaged in a search for Jane Smith, and it says I got no search results, meaning Jane Smith does not exist in no name record matches what I typed in, and it will match exactly Smith and Jane as I typed it in. So I just need to create a new name for Jane Smith. I click on the new name. It will pre-populate the name up here. I could fill in all of this relevant data if I want to. Chances are you're not going to do that, but only because it takes you a few minutes to do that. But the more information you have on a particular person in JustWare, the better. But the realities of this are, I think most folks basically don't care about a lot of this. And it's kind of rude to ask the payer to give you all that information, and you may say that's not a cool thing to do. This will put a name in your database though when I save this. So Jane Smith is going to pay this, and we're just in the snap that same payments. Oh, excuse me, I need to go one more. I actually need to add that name into the case I was working on. And so now my payer on this is going to be Jane Smith.
So you wouldn't recommend just putting her name in the notes, like wife came in,
This is an overstatement to say that information is then lost to you in JustWare, but if you're going to refund this money for some reason, who would you give it to? So the way JustWare is built, it's going to refund it to that payer. And it would take you a couple of extra steps to move that money essentially out and do a couple of different manipulations to get it to the actual payer.
That's why you would want all of her information, though. You have to have an address to submit.
I'm with you. I think the more information, the better, but I know that I preach that, but what I hear from a lot of the people who use this in the rural world is, I got 15 people at the counter, I just don't have time to take all that information down. But I agree with you. If you're going to try to refund this money down the road and you have no address, this could easily be dollars that end up in unclaimed funds account at some point because you have no way to contact her.
I have one more question, and maybe I missed this, I'm sorry.
Okay.
When I'm adding fines, fees, I'm not in the case, I'm just in, I'm in the case, right?
Right. You would do that
But when I
in the
take a
case.
payment, I'm not in that specific case, I'm just in this.
Yes. You are in the name record.
Okay.
So the person that owes you the money, that's whose name record you want to be in.
But how do I put it towards that case?
We're getting there.
Oh, okay.
You're smelling what I'm cooking.
Leading witness.
Let's just have a crack out
Okay.
there. We're getting there. All right. So any questions about the whole name pair? Did I answer your question sufficiently about why I wouldn't put it in there? It will complicate your refunding process if you need to. Yes?
In those views that you went through, advance payments, where does it show how much was originally owed and how much, I only see how much they owe still. So what if they say, how much did I originally owe? Is that in that view at all?
It is not in this particular view unless,
So you have to go in the case and then financials?
not necessarily. If you go over here to the person's, let me just switch over to a different view that includes the financial name summary report.
Do you
So
want to save that first?
Oh, I will have to save. Yeah, let me back through this and then I'll go back and answer your question because I got to save this and I'm not quite ready to save it right now. But I will come back. Receipt number is going to fill in automatically. Well, let me back up. Again, any questions about the whole payer? Okay, notes for anything that you want. Payment status at this point will be blank on the cash payment, so we're going to leave that. And if I hit save right now, JustWare is going to auto allocate that according to that priority, the schedule that I showed you in obligations, and the oldest obligation first. And you'll keep an eye on this number here, this $571, because it should reduce by $25. So we've gone ahead and applied that. And down here at the bottom of our screen, we can now see that we've allocated that to this case, which has a blank court number. And that's bad data entry on my part, because I did not create a court number with this. And this is the court number as you put that into your agency's SNAP-in. So that's the only reason you don't see it there is I did not set up this agency as a court agency and therefore did not add a court number for you, but that's what you would see there. And so this is the auto allocation. We've allocated it to the fine. And what you don't see is on my other screen, I have a receipt that was generated. And this is just a report in JustWare. It can be customized to meet your needs as you see fit. And a lot of people have customized this in various different ways to show different things. Obligation history portion of this is just a history of the obligation and what payments have been made. If you, this came up in one of the other classes, if you open this up and then hit the print and close, it will print this portion. It prints what you see on screen. So if that's relevant to you and you like your payers to have that information, this is the history of all of this person's obligations and payments that have been made. And I find folks are kind of divided on this. Some folks are happy to have that. Other folks said, you know, it just confuses the dickens out of people. I do not want them to have that information. So fine, they've actually customized it and brought this out altogether. And it literally is just a receipt over here. But you can see here's the payment, the amount, and where we applied it to in our payment total.
Can you add fields to that, like say if it went to work, whether they went to the front counter or it came to the mail?
So the question is, can we add fields to this and by putting various different pieces of information in there? And yes, you can. This is a report, but it would need to pull information that you're storing in your database and that already exists in your database at the time you generate this receipt. It's not interactive. You couldn't type into this field. So if you've saved information and you customize this to pull in, so if you wanted to put in payer name, Jane Smith, and next to it you put in Jane Smith's current address, absolutely. That would all have to be in place though before you generate this receipt.
Right.
Right. Which you would have because as a moment ago, we added Jane Smith's name record and we went ahead and if I'd have gone through and added the person's address, as we should, if we got that information, then that would appear in this receipt. Yes?
Are we able to select how we want to allocate it manually? For example, we are not a court, we're an agency.
Sure.
And for example, someone loses his electronic monitoring bracelet for $2,500 and the court says you will pay this. We get chunks of money in
Right.
that he's paid
Specifically
restitution to
for
the
that
court or
monitor.
the victim. And so if the court gives me a check and the guy gives me a check, the guy's money goes to fines and the court's money goes to his electronic monitoring damage.
Right.
I can select that? I can
Yes.
decide that?
Absolutely.
Because we have bunches of stuff that doesn't auto-allocate.
Right. And again, you are one step ahead of me.
Oh,
I'm loving
there you go.
these people who are thinking ahead.
We're talking money.
Either I'm moving really slow or y'all are just really fast. So I'm pretty sure that both of those things are true. Receipts, again, any question about receipts? We good on that? All right, next step. Let's see. Let me go back to the case record here. Let's see. Let me make sure.
Did you want to show the financial name summary?
Yes, thank you, boss. So this is the first question we had was, let's take a look at the cases and the obligations. Now I went ahead and opened up the financial name summary report as opposed to a view that has the report in it because it'll be a little bit easier for us to see. And let me go ahead and zoom that up a little bit so everybody can see that. So we have our next payment that's due, and an analysis essentially of what's due, what's past due, total obligations, any amounts that are available, again, in overpay or in escrow. And here's all of our obligations. This is the just where ID number you see on the left. So these are the cases that the person owes you money in. So you can see what's at the amount that's due, which amounts have been paid off. And again, this is not a working screen, this is just a report. And then we have our history of the payments that came in and each of the receipts that have been issued for this person over time. You can access any of those receipts by clicking on them. So if you ever need to reprint somebody's receipt for any purpose, you can bring that up. Now, this report is dynamic, meaning this is the payment, and this is the allocation of that payment. But if you were to look at this obligation history, the first day that this receipt was generated, and today, again, because this is the obligation history, this has pulled in all of the payments as of today, not the day that the person generated, this receipt was generated. And that's also something that a couple of folks have said, oh, that's not exactly the same piece of paper that I gave the person. So for that reason, they've said, I'm just going to delete obligation history because that portion of the report is dynamic, but the top part is exactly the way that's exactly the receipt that you gave that person. Any questions about that?
So how would you receive restitution that's a pass-through, if you will? The court's taking it in, but it's made out to
The
the
court.
individual,
Oh.
not necessarily the court.
A great question. Keep that in mind
Okay.
because we will get to that scenario in just a second. All right, any questions about that? All right, I'm just going to drop all the way back to, anyway, so that answered your question about the financial name summary and how we can see that. It's not in this particular view, so I would suggest if you like that idea of I want to have this whole history above, let's use that payments. And that's, again, one of the reasons I kind of like that view because I do think it's very useful for your users to have that information. And like I said, I can start taking a payment down here while that's loading, and it takes a moment or two to load, but I now have all that information up here that I just saw. All right, so let's see. Let me make sure I'm keeping track of all of my questions. Manual allocation was one, and so what I'm going to do is manually allocate a payment to a restitution obligation, and that should take care of two of our questions. So Mr. Smith comes in again, and he has a credit card today, and he has $100 that is available on his credit card. I'm going to leave my payment status open at this point, and I specifically want to allocate this to a restitution obligation. So that's all I really need to enter at this point, assuming it's Mr. Burton who's coming in. I don't want to auto-allocate, so I'm not going to pick the for case to specify it goes to a case. But I could auto-allocate this to a case with restitution outstanding, and it would automatically pay that restitution up to the amount of that payment. And only because I set up that restitution as a number one priority obligation. So the thing that would jack that up a little bit is if I had two cases, and in case one, it was January 1st, and I have no restitution obligation, but he still owes me money in that case. In case two, it's February 1st, and I have a restitution obligation. In that case, just where it goes to the oldest obligation first, not the highest priority. It goes to the first due, or the oldest due, and then it goes to, it works its way to the highest priority. And we can't really change that. That's just the way it's built. So that's why we have manual allocations, because a lot of folks do want to make that allocation manual. All right, credit card, if I have an authorization, I'm going to put that in there, and I'm going to go to my manual allocations tab, and that has all of the different obligations this person has. I can sort my obligations alphabetically. I could filter those obligations, if this guy has a whole bunch of them, let's say I just want to see my restitution obligations that this person owes me, and I'm just using that filter, the funnel, to filter it down to the obligation that I want to see. I've got my case that's automatically defaulted in by Justware. It says how much money do you want to allocate to this. If I put 50 in here, because you're a nice court and you will let the person allocate to different, let them pick essentially where they want to pay off. I could do that. And what I see up here is I started out with an available $100. I now have $50 that's available, still available to allocate because I've already allocated $50. And I have $275 obligation that's outstanding for restitution to our pal, Mr. Tim, who was the victim in this case. That's the original due date, and that was the original amount that was there. And again, court number would be there if I had put a court number on this case. Joint and several allows the use of joint and several liability where, well, let me ask this, does anybody use joint and several liability? Okay, so joint and several liability basically is the concept of 3 people commit a crime. Like criminal mischief is the one that comes to mind the easiest. You know, the BB gun to the window spree. You got 3 people who are ultimately determined to be equally liable for all of the damages. And essentially, the legal concept is any one of those, or every one of those people is obligated for the full amount. So if one person comes in and pays it's $100 and the other 2 are scofflaws, it's still, all persons are still obligated to pay that original amount. So Justware will allow you, using that joint and several, to pull up the related cases and decide if you're going to put a portion of that to their case or not, as you see fit.
Does it do any of that automatically, or do you have to do that manually?
There's some manual data entry. There are a couple of steps that you need to make choices with. So, all right, any questions up to this point? Yes, ma'am.
To get around the due date and it messing with the priorities, we set all of ours out 365 days. Do
Right.
you see any problems that might pose?
Other than, actually, I know we just talked about this recently. The issue that I would be concerned about being able to run a obligations due report easily to say, as of this date, this person owes me X dollars as a condition of probation. If they haven't paid by date X, I think the reporting, you'd have to write a report essentially that would find your outstanding past due so that you could start sending harassing letters to say, hey, you're past due, and I'm going to violate your probation if this goes another 20 days. I don't know how you would track that if all of their obligations are due way out there. You'd have to find another place in Justware, maybe an event.
By court dates.
And if you do it by court date, then that would be, you'd essentially be having a court review on that date to say, you got to pay me X number of dollars. You could do it that way, but then you'd have to orient your reports towards those event types for that person. Yeah, that could work.
How does that work for a receivable, depending on the state laws, local laws? Like in Nevada, it's not till it's ordered, so if that's, even if it's past due at the court date, it's not considered a receivable. In our mind, they haven't had their day in court. Interesting, but not all states, I don't think, are like that. So from an accounting standpoint, is that due date important for outstanding, like if you wanted to send something to collections, for instance?
Well, I think it would be, of course. You would have to have, you shouldn't have an obligation on somebody's case until they actually owe you money, which means they are adjudicated on that case. Now, I know that there are some courts who don't do that,
Right.
and they will impose the obligation, and they just know by looking at it, it's not due until we do something else with it. It can be done both ways, but then you would have to account for that type of payment. We'd have to have some kind of distinguishing feature of those types of obligations that are not yet due because there's no disposition, let's say. And those would have to be compartmentalized into a report, so they're on one side, and the true obligations that are owed to the court are on the other side. But I know that there are, I have one client right now who said they will absolutely not put an obligation in there until the guilty plea has been had, because they do not want somebody to show a balance due. They don't want any kind of data error to pull up that person's name and say, oh, you've got an amount that's due, but they kind of missed the part that it hasn't been dispoed yet, and they process it as if it's a past due or an FTC. Warrant goes out, person gets arrested, there's a civil rights lawsuit, and bad things flow from that. So if you are comfortable in your organization having those obligations pre-populate, and many places do this, because the way they've set up their data entry and train their folks, they know exactly which are unpaid and which are paid by the use of a report or just in training. Yes?
Something that we're running into, and I'm hoping that we're wrong and that there is a way to do it. For example, for civil traffic, we have this right on the citation, the amount, if you speed 10 miles over the limit, this is the fee. And then when folks come into court, the judge changes the amount,
Right.
or they change the due date and give them an extra month to pay. And we found that we can't change the due date or the amount
Right.
allocated, so that is true, you
That
can't.
is correct.
So
Once
you
that,
have to get rid of that one and add a new one, or
Jetson thing, no,
adjusting,
but
adjusting?
Yeah.
But the first part of that is true, that once you set that due date on that obligation adjuster, you can't go back and change that. And that's a security feature, basically. You don't want people changing that without a decent track and history to allow you to do that. So your choices could be to
Adjustment entry.
adjusting entry or delete and do another one. Most people are cringe at the idea of deleting a financial obligation. And if there's payments that have been taken on that obligation, you're not going to be able to do that anyway. So,
So the only way is to do an adjusting entry.
yes.
Okay.
In theory, well, no, that's not exactly true. You could do a payment schedule for that one obligation and create that obligation into a payment schedule, put a new due date for that payment schedule, and then you could tinker with that due date. That's a lot of steps compared to doing an adjusting entry.
But you can't adjust the amount ordered.
No,
Okay.
no.
With an adjustment.
Again, only with an adjusting entry. From
Right.
the case snapping, you can't do that except through the adjusting entry. Questions, if I confused that a little more? All right. And now I'm not totally lost, or a little bit lost. Any questions about the manual allocations and how we do that, why you might do that? All right, let me go ahead and save that. I'm not going to wait for that to load. So if you just hit the close because you need to rock and roll and move forward, then you can do that. If the person's not standing there, you don't actually need that receipt. All right, let me quickly bounce back to our PowerPoint, see where we're at, how far. Oops. Taking payments, let's see. And we have covered the bulk of this, so let me go through these a little bit quickly. This is available now out there on our conference website. It was not available day one because I was slack, but on day 2 it was available. And now, just a little further. Here we go. All right, we talked about escrow. We talked about applying the payment to obligations and the receipt. We talked about a little bit how the payment snapping changes. Financial name summary report shows those changes and our amounts paid and amount due. Manual allocation. One thing I didn't show you was that JustWorks going to throw you an error message if you try to allocate more. So if you have in this instance, it looks like it was a $75 payment, and I know that because of this amount here. This is the payment I was trying to take, and I went ahead and allocated $70 to the fine and $10 to the court costs, and I only had 75, so JustWorks promptly told me that I was not doing this correctly, and gave me an error message, so no problem, just change that before, because you can't save it, so you have to change it and fix it. Questions about that? If you under allocate and so let's say that you have a $70 payment and you only allocate $75 payment and you only allocate $70 of that, you're gonna have $5 left over. If there are no other obligations on the case, then it throws it back into their overpay account, because he gave you more than he owes. So, and then you'd have to do the vouchering process to refund that money to them. Sorry, went too far. All right, so we, yes?
The check marks next to the available in escrow and available on overpay. The purpose for those, the little check mark?
Yeah, that is an outstanding question that I do not at this second have an answer for.
Like if you uncheck it, what does that mean, or if you don't have?
mean,
I'm
you
gonna
can't
toss
use
out a
it.
lifeline to my left, since Sean is talking.
Yeah, you then, like, so if you have money sitting in overpay, but you don't want to use that money towards the upward, let's say we have money sitting in overpay for whatever reason, but we're getting a check in, and we want to use that check to pay for the case, not the overpay money, we can uncheck that, so we would not make that overpay money available to manually allocate to the fines and fees. We would just make the check that's coming in available to pay towards those fines and fees. And the same process with escrow. If we're holding money in a trust account, we don't want that money to be spent towards these other obligations that came in on a different case. This money then will be locked down. We're only then using the funds that are available for us to transfer to that.
So by unchecking it, you make it unavailable.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. And it's for that transaction. It's not for long term. It's just saying, hey, right now, those funds are sitting in my trust account. We're not moving it.
And that would be important if you have escrowed money on this person's account, because you know, this money essentially is supposed to be held for another case. The money that you're taking in as a payment, and that was a bad idea. Sorry. The money that you're taking in on this case, again, you want this money essentially simply flow into one of the outstanding obligations down here. So just uncheck those two things, and assuming there's money in them, then this payment will allocate properly to the obligations, either if you auto-allocate or manually allocate. Thank you, Sean.
No problem.
And will those be rechecked every time you come back into the payment screen?
With the defaults in, yes. Good.
I was just gonna put a plug in for the help guide. If you're at home and you're like, hey, what does that checkbox do? You're on the manual allocation snap in, hit F1. It more than likely will default you to that specific section in the help guide and explain exactly, like Sean, though not in that nice tone. I mean, that's like a silvery tone there. But it will explain how that works.
Jed gets like almost a penny every time you use the help guide.
Almost a penny every time.
So I gave Jeff almost a penny and hit it. But actually, I just found a penny, so here you go.
Finish your day.
So I was actually in the manual allocation snapping when I did this, so that's why it drove me to the manual allocation.
I have a quick question, sorry, as you're backing up this right here.
Yep, okay, we're backing up.
The escrow, is that like, say, a cash bail posted, say the court clerks haven't had a chance to put in their fines yet, but they come directly after court to make a payment? Is that what escrow would be?
So the question is, let's say that the person is in court, and tell me if I'm wrong about this. Person's in court, the clerk is, they essentially. All right, so I popped this out just where, but any questions about payments? Because we're about to case payments. We're about to move on to non-monetary payments and non-case payments. Okay. Let's see.
Can I ask a question? What's the difference between case escrow and main escrow on the prior slide?
The case escrow, it's in the payment snap-in, where I went to the for case. It's essentially escrow, it escrows it for a case. And it actually applies it to that case. So if there's more, if you apply more money than the obligations that exist in that case, I believe it will cost me the case escrow account. Because let's say if my $75 payment here, and I put it in and I hit the for case drop down and I said, put it in this case, but there's only $30 worth of obligations in that case, the money would need to go somewhere, and it would show, because I said, put it in this case, that's why it would show up in that case escrow, as opposed to his name escrow, because I really did pick, I want it tracked into that area. All right, so, non-monetary payment. So this is just a different payment type. And the point of this is community service or work-off type programs where you can adjust essentially the amount of a fine or a particular obligation in a case. How many people do a community service work-off? Or a pay and stay? You spend 2 days in jail, it's worth $25 or something like that. Same kind of a concept. This process basically allows us to reduce an obligation and call it a payment type so that we can kind of track that using the payment concept to say, because we like this reporting better. I mean, that would be your decision kind of tree, is saying, hey, I just like it, I like to take payments, I want to make it simple for my people, and frankly, I don't want my users in the case adjusting the amount of a fine. You may very well set JustWare up so that you can't do an adjusting entry and only a supervisor can make an adjusting entry. So this is kind of a slick way because we've created in the background an obligation type that is called a non-monetary obligation. And it gets excluded from the deposit report that Sean talked about in his class by default because it's not real money. We don't want anything that's not real money going into our deposits. So that's what this is. It's simply another payment type. The data entry is identical. You walk in, you select the payment type because the guy gives you the receipt from the recycling center where he spent 8 hours of community service and 8 hours is worth $5. So he gives you the little piece of paper. Your clerks, or maybe they send it in or the probation officer sends it to you and you just enter it here, put in the amount and pick the obligation on the bottom because often courts also have very specific rules about what can be reduced and what cannot be reduced. You shouldn't be able to reduce a restitution obligation by community service. That's not fair. And there are certain fines and fees that are required, and the rules are you can't reduce those. You can only work off your fine, let's say. So that's how we would use that non-monetary payment. Questions about that? And you'll see later, if I don't get moving here, you won't see it, but you will see later how that's collected in the reports. When you generate a non-monetary payment, it just shows up here in your receipt like everything else does. Again, identical amount, and it'll reduce the amount of this fine. And this is just a snap. It's just a screenshot of a case snap-in where it shows that my unallocated amount, or my total amount was reduced. My unallocated amount was reduced by $20 to accommodate this $20 fine. And again, you can do the same thing by using an adjusting entry. And you could simply put in your adjustment type. You create in the background your adjustment type. Instead of calling it an adjusting entry, we'll call it the community service work-off. You tell it which obligation you want to change. Put in your adjustment as a negative number using the negative sign. And then JustWare will calculate the current adjusted amount once you save that transaction. Any questions about that? And again, this is something that folks might very well say, I really don't want my users to be in there adjusting anything in the case. Once that's done, that's done. So you may choose not to let people use the adjusting amount. Or if you're comfortable with that, that's fine. JustWare, after you do the adjustment, JustWare is going to recalculate the adjustment amount. If you make a data entry error by chance when the obligation was created, or if your business rule for some reason misfired and put the incorrect obligation in there, you could absolutely write quick. If you saw that, you go in and do a quick adjustment and you're good. In this scenario, I just fat fingered the amount and I put 823 instead of the true amount, which is 723. All right, that takes us to voiding a payment because stuff happens sometimes, just like I did. I adjusted that obligation because I made a data entry mistake. But let's say you make a mistake in your payment, and for some reason you've got to go back and void that payment. there's a couple of different steps here. Basically, we're just going to go back into our payment screen. And in this scenario that I'm describing is, let's say the day of this transaction, before you've done your reconciliation, you found that you made a little mistake in here, and it really shouldn't have been 75, it should have been 65. Well, you can go in and void this payment by changing the payment status to void. Hit save, and it's going to give you a warning message to say, are you sure you want to do this? Because you're not going to be able to undo this once you change that payment status, because it'll void that entire payment. And the practical effect of that is it just reverses that transaction. The obligation goes back in to the person's name record, and it's as if that payment hadn't happened. But this entry here, once you void it, is going to be saved and will always be in JustWare, so that you can track those things. You do have the ability to put into the notes field in this payment type what might have happened there before you save this void. So questions about that? So we do have it built so that you can't just delete this payment. You are always going to have a record of this deletion. So security feature.
And functionally, what JustWare does is it uses the adjusting entry snap-in when you void a payment. Did you know that? If you've ever voided a payment, you can go to that case and look at the adjusting entry, and JustWare just added adjusting entries to add those values back on your case. That's how we're tracking it. It's all auditable.
And so all you would have done, you would just do a positive adjusting entry essentially to reverse that. If you were done manually, JustWare's just doing that entry for you. All right, once you have voided that payment, well, you just enter a new payment. I guess in this case, I actually did make a mistake. I put the wrong reference number in. But any one of those, any mistake can be corrected in this way. I get to put a note in that says, here's why I did this, so nobody's going to come looking to me and say, hey, there's something fishy going on here. You're voiding payments. That's a bad idea. But keep in mind, you can't escape these, and it's okay. It's built that way. It's built really for the protection of the user to track. There's a little bit of an obstacle to doing a payment. I'm going to go really quickly through this because we're a little short of time. But basically, JustWare, and I think most of you I've seen in the end-of-day reconciliation class, and essentially, JustWare has a feature that will allow you to, when you collect all the money during the day, JustWare is tracking the accounts that money goes to and who is supposed to get that money. JustWare will allow you to voucher out and kind of zero out your payments for that day and give that money or make it available to be able to write checks to that person or pass on to the next accounting layer. If a particular transaction that you've done ends up getting put into one of these in an amount available, this is a voucher screen. If my transaction that I needed to void was up here and I actually had created a voucher down here, once you create a voucher down here, that locks up that transaction. All the transactions that went into that voucher, they're all locked up. So the only way you can void your payment is to get in here and void the voucher. Most of the time, folks set it up so that only a couple of people in your organization can do a voucher void. And pretty much to address data entry errors, or if somebody gives you an insufficient funds check that you've processed as money that you received, and you choose not to put it into JustWare's essentially holding pen for pending payments, waiting for them to clear, then once that NSF check comes back a month from now, if you've already vouchered that transaction out, you're going to have to find the transaction where that NSF check was taken, undo that voucher, do the whole process of taking, essentially voiding that payment, and then adding whatever fees that you might add for an NSF check to that obligation. That sets the person's obligations back to where they should be, and gives you some accountability at that. So, but for the most part, and I'm just going to blow right through the voucher pay to because Sean did a great job of doing that. So, this is apropos, right? When I blow through 5 slides and I don't explain it.
Those good laughs or bad laughs?
Yeah, right. Any questions so far? All right. Let's look at one other way to take case payments. Sometimes you don't have a need to have that receipt screen pop up. So There are folks who get a stack of checks in the mail because someone else collects them. You might get, actually, you might let people do mail-in payments, and you might have a whole bunch of payments that you simply need to process, as opposed to you got somebody at the counter who's looking at you and has somewhere else to be, and you want to give them a receipt and get them the heck out of your day. This case payments tool is a really nice way to do this. I know there's one jurisdiction we work with uses in-court payments, and they get a list of all the payments that in-court has taken, and they'll take that list, go in here and use case payments, because all they want to do, they just need a quick way of accepting that payment and moving on from that case. So I'm going to go into JustWare and do this because it'll be a little bit quicker than, and I want to make sure we get you out of here on time. So, as soon as I find the mouse, there we go. Under our accounting tools here, we go into our payment screen and we go to case payments. These are the same data entry fields as you find in the name payment snap-in. It just allows you to do a very quick search for the case. And I'm going to search for 14-3. It pulls up a case, 14-3. Here's my amount, $10. I got a check. Let's say I do a cashier's check. Here's my reference number, notes, blah, blah. I still have the ability to allocate it to escrow if I want to. I'm the collecting agency. There's a date I got it. I got the right person there. I got the right person that paid it, and I'm done. So again, you can do these in 5 seconds or so, which allows you to process that big stack that you've got very quickly. And then at the bottom is simply a report that's pulling in all the payments that I did this day so that you can see. And we'll talk a little bit about this particular report later. But it allows you to run this, of course, for whatever date and time you choose, whatever payment type you want. But realistically, this is just, it's quick data entry. That's what it's for. Anybody think they could use something like that?
Yes.
Yeah, traffic bureaus, stuff like that, that are just you get a stack of parking tickets that somebody paid by mail. It's perfect use for something like that. All right, let me see. What have I missed here on payments? All right, let's go on to non-case payments because most everybody has a situation where somebody comes in and asks you to research a case, or they need certified copies, something like that. Well, we have a tool for that. There's an app for that, right? There's a tool for that in JustWare. Oops, sorry, that already moved me on to something else. So let me go back here. Again, back in my payments that I access from accounting tools over here, I can just choose my non-case payments. Comes up with this nice definition of what sorts of things do you charge people for. Certified copy, yep, it's $3 per certified copy. They asked me for 3 of those. I had a research request for 1 case, that's $10, and I made some other copies while I was in there, and I made 34 of those at 25 cents per. So this person owes us $27.50, or this law firm, or whoever it is. We can take the payment right from here for these different payment types. If we needed to put a reference number of some sort, again, similar data entry to taking a case-based payment. I can type in my amount of the payment of, let's see, $27.50, he gave me $29. Calculates my change down here. We've got these quickie data entries that will allow you to just select one of these. So you can see I'm just totally jacked.
20 and 10.
But, all right, any questions about that? The name and notes, you can choose to put this, associate a name or any notes associated with this. You could also link it to a name record if you had some reason to do that, if it already exists in your database, or if you want to add that name to the database. So law firms, maybe that would be useful to put in there, or a particular case number that you maybe need somehow to track this, or for that matter, maybe if it is a law firm who's asking you to do this research, they might very well say, could you put, Jones versus Simonelli on here so that when I give this to my legal assistant, she'll know who to charge for this amount. So it's a kind of nice way of doing that.
I have a question.
Oh, yes.
So can you, for instance, enter that in and it's due, but maybe they haven't paid it yet? For instance, a law firm is going to send a check in at a later date. Is that possible? Or is this truly just a receiving functionality?
The way I have set it up here, I would say no,
Okay.
because I expect my payment. The only way I can see to do that is creating a payment type that's unique, that says deferred payment or something like that.
Okay.
That then you could break that out and track it separately,
Right.
adding a little bit of complication to your audit trail, I think, but you could do that, at least that's off the top of my head. Have anybody asked that? That's a very good question. All right, any questions? You'll see it's a little different receipt that's built for this. Again, this is a report in JustWare. Questions? And the whole point of this is you don't have to have a case in order to take a payment. So it accommodates all those non-case payments. All right. And we're good. Payment plans. Let's talk about this. We do have a payment plan feature. What time is it and what time should I be done?
2:30.
Is that what time I'm supposed to be done?
After 2:45.
You got 15 minutes.
All right, we're going to roll directly into JustWare then to do this. Make sure we... All right, so we are going to go to payment plans. And a payment plan can be created from the person's name record by going to the payment schedule view, or we can create it from a case record. And these are just, again, these are just different ways you can access it. You'll actually create it, the payment plan, in the payment plan snap-in. So it's going to take you to the same place no matter where you go. Always bad when it just stops. It's like driving a hybrid car and the engine just stops when you're at the stoplight. Fundamental problem here. I'm not going to be able to go forward.
And I was going to throw in a plug for the help guide right there. Video tutorial explains exactly how to do this.
I was shocked that you were going to do that.
He gets a
Shocking
nickel
me.
for video tutorials.
Anyway, it's a good point though that Jen makes, is there are some excellent tutorials and video tutorials that you can get to. So, all right, so we are in our case. There is a case summary report that's available up here, and I think it's something that's a little wacky here. Not able to expand that, but anyway, there's a case summary report up here. Promise you. All right, we're not going to deal with that problem because that's embarrassing that I can't get that to work. But let's, I don't really care about that actually, because I'm going to create my payment plan down here. Here's my case involved person. So this is our obligated party. I'm going to create a new payment schedule down here. I get to name it. Let's see, Burton plan. I actually think I might have created a payment plan for this guy, so I might be creating a new one. I can prioritize this, and that's really all we're going to do here. We're just going to name the plan, and we're going to start moving down the path here. How do you want this to be paid? I'll give you several options, and this is a good place to do plug the help guide because there's an outstanding explanation of this in the help guide. Do we want it done, the pattern of this to be monthly, twice a month, days, what day of the month, the first, second, third, fourth Tuesday of every month, however you want to set that up. I'm just going to set one up as the fourth day of the month because the person has let me know that they get paid on the first day of the month, but we want to make sure the check clears, but they'll have money by the fourth to pay this off. And then JustWare is going to give you some options here to say, okay, this is starting on today's date, or you can start at whatever date that you choose to. It's just a calendar. So if you say this schedule will actually start a month from today because you're nice, that's great. Otherwise, it starts today. I can say, I want you to make 10 payments, and JustWare will calculate the amount of each payment based on the number of occurrences. I can say, I want this to be paid off by the 29th of 2015, and JustWare is going to calculate that for me. Or I can say, take the obligations that he owes, and I'm going to select my obligations down here, and calculate everything for me, and just give me the payment amount this person is owed whenever it's paid in full. So I like the idea of, I'm going to have, let's say 7 payments that this person is going to do. Or I'm sorry, payment amount, I could say, if you're going to do the amount in $10 increments, then JustWare would calculate and paid in full at a rate of $10 per month or $100 per month. And of course, the judges get to decide what they want in terms of the payment schedule, or probation officers, or whoever does that. But you've got choices here, however you want to do that. And you're not quite done yet, though, because you have to say, well, what obligations do I want to include in this schedule? And so here's what I want to include. I could select all of them. Let's use the JustWare feature for that, and select all rows. And we select it, or I can select some of these and choose to have those in my obligations. And all you're doing is saying, this is, add up this number here, and that's the amount of the payment schedule, the total amount that's due. So I selected all of his obligations. That totaled up to $446. And JustWare calculated the payment amounts that are going to be due and the payment schedule. There is a payment schedule that a payment schedule report that you can generate and give to them very quickly before they walk out the door. Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong one. Name record. Very good.
You're on a case right now.
See, thank you. So I went back, all I did is I was on the case record trying to print the payment schedule report, and you've got the name record to do that. Or you could go to, if you know the name ID of the person, you could go to System Admin and pull that up. But essentially, you could give this to them, gives them the payments. We have expanded and contracted sections of this report. And this is dynamic so that as a person makes payments and you apply them to this schedule, then the status will change. Questions about that? You can delete a payment schedule once it's created if you find you have additional cases and you then want to delete that payment schedule and consolidate. There's quite a number of things that you can do with payment schedules. How many people like having payment schedules? You just want them to pay. Pay it. Get out of my hair. Yes, question up right.
This is also a way out there question, but sometimes in our court, we don't have an amount that is owed. For example, child support is ordered to be 25% of your money. It's a tribal court where people are receiving a per capita distribution of revenues. And the judge will order 50% of your per capita payment starting this date.
Right.
So there's nothing we could do to set up a payment plan to say.
Yeah, without an amount.
You need an end amount to break up, right?
Yes. Yeah, I can't think of any other way you could do that without the total amount.
Total amount.
But, yeah.
Well, how do you do it now, though? I mean, how do you do it on paper? How would you establish
We
a
just-
payment schedule?
We don't set up a payment schedule, it's just, because also that distribution amount changes based on the revenues.
Right.
So we can't say someone's going to get this amount every quarter.
Well, that's the first time I've heard that. That actually is it's an excellent need.
It's pretty neat.
We we'd have to do some thinking about how we might be able to do that, possibly with non-collectibles and a report. So that when you receive the amount, so the order would be 10% of your per capita distribution, let's say.
Until the
to,
child turns 18.
Yeah, something like that. And then I can't see you doing it any other way than if you just have to start with some amount. So the per capita payment comes in, you would then have to enter, maybe in a report, enter that amount in non-collectibles, let's say, and then a report could pick that up, calculate the amount that's due, and then you'd at least have a document that you could give and say, here's what you owe me, or here's what I took out of your per capita payment,
Okay, I see.
possibly.
Receipt.
That'd be an interesting exercise to actually try to do that. But it seems like with a combination of a report and the non-collectibles, you should be able to do that.
Yeah,
At
as it
least
is,
come up with some
we just
tracking.
simply don't track child support adjustments. So, because we can't.
Yeah, that would be tough.
But we would like to.
There's another question back here, Ryan.
Yes,
So on the payment plans, we have judges who get creative with ours. They want to
I
get-
hate that.
Creative judge.
So, they'll want to, set them out by a certain day, then their payments start after that.
Right.
Is there a lot of leeway in this payment plan that you can do adjustments?
You can use schedule exceptions that we see up as the second. So it's a two-part. So the question is, when you have a creative judge, because judges do tend to, we used to call them the blue shoes dispos. It's like crazy things that people do. But since they're judges, we can't say crazy because that'd be an ethical violation. Anyway, the question is, when you have judges that are creative, or you have a probation department that might be creative, because that's possible, and you want a really varying schedule, you could start with the base amount in your schedule and as best you could fit whatever the judge has said into a scheduled payment, and through the use of a schedule exception, you could add different exceptions that maybe would change that a little bit. So in this, what the exception does is essentially allows you to relieve that payment burden for a certain time and eliminate the person's obligations for that period of time and then pick it up later on down the road.
So could you use that for a warrant for failure to pay? Or where would you do that? Because, is this payment plan still active if you issue a warrant for failure to pay?
Oh, yeah. But yeah, that obligation exists. So the scenario is, I'm guessing the scenario is, a person owes you money, you failed to pay, missed a payment, you issue a warrant essentially that he could be picked up on. The amount of that warrant is the amount that's in the schedule, because that's what he owes you. Or it's his total amount, I don't know, but I'm assuming it's going to be the one that's in the schedule. I wouldn't go to exceptions because he still owes you the money. When he gets picked up, he's going to pay you a certain amount to get out of jail.
Plus more for a warrant fee and some other
Right.
things, so
Right.
that's why I was wondering.
Yeah, I think it would just be handled, I don't think we do anything with exceptions. He still owes you the money, we just handle it through the payments that he would do. The bond payment would then be applied to his obligations potentially, if that's how you did, if you chose not to if you chose to do that.
One item to note on payment schedule specifically, there is a new application parameter. Welcome to 510, everyone. So if you're not on 510 yet, when you get there, there's a new application parameter dealing with payment schedules. It allows you to specify whether if somebody makes a overpayment or an underpayment, how that money gets applied to the payment schedules. So in the old days, 5.9 before, depending on how you set up your payment schedule, now that's application parameter. You can find more about that in the help guide. Yep.
And this is the parameter that you would say, if I've got extra money, here's how I want you to apply that extra money. I want you to apply it to the balance, or I want you to add it to the next payment. So either way, you're going to give me credit for that.
That's new.
All right, let me take a quick look here at where we are at. Talked about schedules, we're all good. End of the day, reconciliation. Anybody who went to Sean's class, this is really a similar kind of a concept. And basically, we do this by two different reports. The payments received by user, payment, whatever is most useful to you. But at the end of the day, you want to account for your money, so you want to run some kind of report that says, I'm me, I took on this date, and up here, I took my amounts, certain amounts in. You can filter this report down the way you want. I think generally it's pretty easy or pretty useful to filter it into the different categories of payments, because that's what you're looking at in your drawer. You're going to have, I don't know, I used to work in retail, so we used to do, you had your piles. The credit cards are in one pile, cash is in one pile, checks are in one pile. You just kind of made the pile theory. And then you went through and accounted for each of those, put a sticky on them. And this payments report would allow you to do that, because it does allow you to break it up by your payment types. This payments received by user, again, the same thing. This only happens to have one type of payment, but each of the payment types would be here. You see, the voided payments do not go away. So the voided payments for this time period are going to show up, so you can't ever escape those. Anyway, that's a very quick reconciliation. So all of the things you do end up showing up in this reconciliation. There's also another payment history that you can open up and take a look at. It's actually a working screen that you can make modifications by the end of the day. So if you go through all of your transactions and you find that you did make a data entry error, rather than opening up that case, you could go to the payment history, open it up, change the status to void, retake that payment with the correct amount, put your notes in as appropriate, but you can do it from this screen. So it's maybe a slick little tool for some folks to kind of double check themselves at the end of the day.
That's like an Easter egg. I forget that that's even there.
I found it.
It's in the help guide.
It is in the okay.
Deposits. Again, that's a little beyond the scope of what we're talking about, but JustWare has a deposit report and a deposit utility that allows you to create deposits based on the payments that are in here. The one nice thing about this is it breaks our non-monetary payments out from the payments that you took that day, just so that you know on a daily basis essentially how much money that you're not going to collect because the person's worked it off. And that's it. Any questions? I wish that was my sailboat, or that I had anything to do with that sailboat, but I